I was terrified. I had brought nothing to prepare me for a hike through the woods. What little waning light remained was on borrowed time. I felt pretty foolish. But if I hadn't followed the book to the letter, I'd be dead by now. I'd rather face the unknown journey than give up trusting the book. Forward march. I crossed the dirt path that ran behind every house on the block and marked the border of the forest. I was able to pick through the trees fairly easily at first, but as I got deeper in, the branches got thicker and the sky got darker. Soon, I was fighting against near pitch black. I saw a clearing up ahead. The waning moon was shining just well enough through the darkness that I could see the trees surrounding it. I made for the clearing and got there in a couple of minutes. Just before I emerged into the light, a face appeared next to the tree at my eye level. I yelled, but this time I made sure that I did not reach for the car keys, which had proven worse than worthless against the demons in my head. I pulled forth the rosary and pocket watch, thrusting them both bravely in front of the face. It was a printed picture nailed to a tree. Missing, it announced to the world. There was a picture of a smiling bald man, a last seen on date about 3 weeks earlier, and the name Gordon, with the last name no longer visible due to weathering. I laughed in relief. Well, Gordon, I'm sorry, I said aloud. If you've been gone for 3 weeks and they think you might be in the woods, then you're probably dead. I walked into the clearing feeling guilty about my emotional snap to comedy, but it had been a really long fucking day. The moonlight was just enough for me to open the book again and start reading. Walk forth, son, to release what is trapped. This part ended a chapter. I felt more than a little annoyed. I had already gone through a rather arduous process to release an internal demon. Did Dad not realize that fact? I sighed and continued through the clearing and into the trees. At first, I felt a slight sense of metaphysical purpose as I went forward. I was crashing through darkness, trying to find the light. The 6th time I fell down, I started to get pissed off. The last several messages had been pretty explicit. What if I had misinterpreted this one? It was just a chapter title that read Into the Woods. Maybe I had completely botched the meaning. I turned around. Oh, shit. There was darkness in every direction. I couldn't go back, or forward for that matter, since I had no idea which way was which. Of course I had left my cell phone back at my house. I punched a branch, then picked a direction and started walking. In retrospect, I thought, as I tripped over invisible roots and ran into painful tree trunks, it seemed a poor choice to forego my cell phone due to the belief that salt in a pocket watch would suffice for being prepared. Actually, I forgot the salt. Maybe I was giving myself too much credit. I really wanted to check the book at this point, but it was beyond impossible with the trees covering the moon. I'd have to wander. I had lost all sense of patience or purpose by the time I found another clearing up ahead. I was so relieved I almost sprinted, but I clocked my head pretty hard on a low-hanging branch and actually hit the ground. The ego rush that I'd acquired from successful demon hunting finally dissipated in that moment. I got back up and wandered blarily toward the clearing, more irritated at my mum and dad than I had been since my senior year of high school. I got into the opening and did not see anything of significance at first, so I sat down to take a rest. And I heard breathing. It was a raspy sound that lacked a clear location. It was definitely not human. I stood up and wheeled it around, looking for something big and mean. I found something small and frail. The breathing was coming from a fox pup, lying on its side with its leg in a trap. It looked to be in the throes of death. I checked the clearing to make sure that we were alone. It seemed to be so at the moment. The trap was the variety that had a snapshot claw. It was clamped around the fox's leg with a sizable amount of dried blood surrounding it. Clearly, it had been there for a while. I approached it to heroically rescue the fox, and I failed. Turns out those traps are fucking hard to open, which I guess is the point. I finally found that if I could push the heel of my shoe against one end and pull the other one just enough to pry open the jaws, I pulled the trap forward and let the fox's paw slide out. It didn't move upon being free. The fox was clearly exhausted and near death. I tossed the trap aside and reached out to pet it. Ow! The son of a bitch bit my hand! I yowled and pulled back, cussing at the creature. It did not stand up or move in any way. I wasn't bleeding. I figured that the bite had prepared me, so I went in for another, more careful look. The fox was dead. The final trauma of being forced out of the trap, followed by a last-ditch effort of self-defense, clearly was too much for the damaged creature. I sat down on a rock and took in the silence for a minute. I used to go on walks in the woods back here with my dad. We would go forth into the woods, bonding over the silence between us. I know it sounds odd, but it brought us together. The walks waned in frequency as I grew into my teens, and eventually stopped altogether. I realized in sadness that I could not remember which time had been the last. I wondered what I would have thought if I'd known it at the time. I miss my mum and dad. I picked up my parents' book and started reading in the moonlight. The death of the fox should illuminate the fact that a physical release and a spiritual release are often inseparable from one another. Never face a demon without this fact in mind, Peter. I looked at the fox, who still had an open mouth and open eyes. I wondered if animals cared about not being buried. I wondered about why we did. I turned back to the book. Moreover, know this. You cannot hope to defeat the demonic nature in the greatest of beings if you are unable to see the angelic nature in the least of them. Despite the bite, the fox was waiting for you. Remember that. I stood up, grabbed a handful of dirt and sprinkled it on the animal. It was a symbolic gesture, but that was all Polonius needed, so I left it at that. The book went on. Now go home, Peter. The teenage angst returned. Oh, I'd like to, Mom, but this wilderness jaunt does not seem very well planned, now does it? My voice echoed bizarrely, so I looked through the trees. I was at the border of the woods. Just beyond the trees to my left ran the dirt path that traversed behind the backyards of both my house and Buster's house. I had wandered a circuitous route and ended up right back where I started. Isn't it irritating when our parents are right? I headed through the trees and emerged onto the path, which was bathed in moonlight. I read as I walked. No person can achieve great things alone, son. Trust the man in black. I appreciated my father's words and all, but that was a little creepy. As I walked towards the house, I began to hear rustling. It wasn't natural. Neither was the sulfur smell. I looked to the left, into the woods that I had just exited. And there it was. The demon was clearly grinning as it charged forth from the trees. This one did not look like a man at all. It sprinted on cloven feet, and its glowing yellow eyes left trails in the air as it ran. At least 10 feet tall with curly goat horns, it was by far the most terrifying of the three I had seen. I didn't have time to grab the rosary or drop the book. My left hand had barely clutched the pocket watch when its cannon of an arm made contact with my temple. I tried to open my eyes, but which way was up? I couldn't wake up fully on account of the dizziness, but I couldn't sleep because of the noise or the heat. Why are they yelling? There's no need for that. I finally was able to prop myself up on 2 elbows and look around. There were flames in every direction. A ring of salt encircled me, and the inferno was unable to penetrate it. Past the salt, there was only fire. And the demon. He sounded pissed. I was not alone in the circle. A man I did not know stood between me and the demon, crouching slightly like he was ready to fight. I noticed vaguely that he held an onyx rosary in his left hand. He was facing the demon and shouting. The roar of the fire and the demon combined was deafening. He held his tree-trunk arms forward as though he wanted to crush us, but something seemed to be making him hesitate. The strange man turned his head to face me. He was wearing black. If at all possible, sir, I really need all the help I can get at this moment if we both intend to live. I wanted to say, of course, I've taken down 2 demons today and it would be fucking thrilled to bag a third. Step aside, pal. What I said was... And that's when I passed out.